those are components of patrol boats that would have been used to stop potential American invasion. Here's an American destroyer escorting a Soviet ship. They literally came right up to the edge and then stopped. So literally, they face-to-face to the blockade line and they stopped. And their stalemate hit. Little bit did we know that there was a Soviet submarine. Well, we knew there were Soviet submarines, but they were electric powered, really hard to detect. And they came within literally a second from firing a torpedo at an American ship because they thought that the Americans had fired. They're underwater, they couldn't quite tell. That torpedo was nuclear tipped. That would have quickly escalated to World War III. The executive officer screamed to stop and let's get confirmation. We might not have had to worry about the old AP exam again. And the 24th turned into stalemate. It was literally that close. Well, I'm not going to talk about this. On the 26th, 3 different events will happen. Not 3, I'm sorry. 4 different events are going to happen on the 26th. And all 4 of them could have triggered nuclear war. I have to tell you these stories, but I'll tell you these stories after the exam. I just got to tell you because they're good stories. Yes, it involved a bear, but it's the funniest story in a very dark way. But on the 28th, I'm sorry, the 27th, with the world on edge, Khrushchev sent, it's called the letter, even though he had to broadcast it over Radio Moscow, that it was intercepted by American listening posts in Western Europe. There was no direct, secure line connecting the Kremlin to Washington, D.C. What a horrible mistake. I mean, they couldn't do, that's part of the reason why diplomacy wasn't going to work. The first letter, Khrushchev kind of talked about going to the edge of war, but basically it was a compromise letter. Don't invade Cuba, we pull the missiles out. World saved. You can imagine just this sigh of relief in the White House. And then, a few hours later, another letter was read over Radio Moscow. And it was a letter from Khrushchev, who was clearly either under duress or drunk. And as it would turn out, both. And in it, he threatened war if we don't also remove those missiles from Turkey and Italy. We were going to remove those obsolete missiles anyways. They were ready to blow up on their own on the launch pad. We stuck them there really fast, but then it'll look like blackmail. What Kennedy did is they sent word. We agreed to the first message, and we act like we never heard the second one. Clever. But we gave Russia time. You got to noon Eastern time, so it's time for Eastern United States and Cuba on the 28th. Holy bomb. An hour before. In fact, people in Kennedy's White House, just a tiny number of people knew about this. They thought it was over. They went home that night thinking this is the last night. And they really were weighing this option. We get our families out of D.C. because D.C. is going to be blown off the face of the earth. That's what they thought. But if we do that, are we now abusing the power we have being in the White House? Will we cause a panic? I mean, this was a real issue. They thought it's over. Yeah.
So who said the 12th name?
Kennedy.
Kennedy said that's the Soviets?
Yeah. So, yeah.
I have a great aunt who was like working in like the White House as like a secretary.
Oh wow!
She didn't know that like this was going to happen, but she knew that something bad was going to happen.
I believe it.
She thought I was going to be the head. But she was like 20 years old at the time or something.
That must be terrifying. And that's the thing. You can imagine if you're most of the workers there just know something going on. When you see all these people running around in what's called the executive committee. Wow! How long did she work there?
I don't know. She was like in college, so it's kind of like she was doing through the college on the side as like a job.
Wow. An hour before the deadline, word came from the Soviets that they agreed. The United States will not invade Cuba, we promise, and they pulled the missiles out. But they would still keep soldiers and planes there. And little did we know that they had atomic bombs there to well into the 1980s. But in secret, We sent word to the Soviet embassy. You can't say anything. So we didn't find out about this as a people until for 4 years. We'll remove those missiles too. We were going to do it anyways, but we removed them. The world went to the very edge of nuclear war and pulled back. And remember, these are rational, intelligent people who nearly blew the world up. So we like to think, oh, these are smart people. They would never do that. You know, Kennedy, not saying he's right on everything, but he was an intellectual, intelligent, thoughtful person, and he nearly did it. And so that shows you how dangerous it could be. But we'd like to think rationality will save us. Not always. Well, there's something else. For the next decade, everybody's going to be thinking about this. When we're going to get fully involved in the civil war in South Vietnam, we are thinking. We're consciously thinking. We don't want another Cuban Missile Crisis. We're going to make sure we do things that won't explode into World War III, especially since the Chinese, which are just north of North Vietnam, exploded their atomic bomb. You know, we had soldiers walk into our atomic bomb. They had cavalry, guys on horses. It was kind of a surreal image of them, yeah. Why not? Okay, so a couple positive things will come out in the next year. It's either alleviate the arms race. Soon this will be called détente, which I'll get to soon, but it's two things. First off, a limited test ban treaty, and secondly, a hotline that would connect the two. The limited test ban treaty would say no more open atmospheric tests, and other countries would sign on. In 87, or 86, 87, they would, get my years right, 86, no more underground tests. Because we still did underground tests well into the 80s. North Korea, for example, never signed that treaty, and that's where they tested their bomb. And a hotline would be a direct line. When I was a kid, I always had this image of this red telephone, and they pick it up, and the Kremlin's on the line. It was actually a telegraph line, but it was secure, so they could communicate. And Kennedy had a boost, yeah.
Was it a hotline to?
The Kremlin and the White House would be connected, and it's called a hotline. Now it is a phone line, but it's a secure phone line that technically it's underground, so it would be shielded if something happened in the atmosphere that could knock down the satellites like a nuclear bomb, the electromagnetic wave would knock down communications. It would supposedly be there. We've never had to test that one out. But Khrushchev would be discredited. And in 1964, he would be ousted from power. They did not execute him. He could live out his life in his dacha, the state. Actually, two men took power. But Leonid Brezhnev by the 70s, this closest human to every guy in the Shah role, Leonid Brezhnev, he would eventually become the premier of the Soviet Union. And even though he was did not have full authority, he became the symbol of the Soviet Union for me. When I think of the Soviet Union, I still see Leonid Brezhnev. I see those eyebrows and always wearing his uniform with all his medals. And supposedly he had more. But what they did is the Soviets vowed to never be humiliated again. And they dramatically increased the arms race. And they were going to put out as many nuclear weapons, but more importantly, as many ICBMs and SLBMs. Okay, I told you what ICBMs are. Anybody know what an SLBM is?
Space.
No, good guess. Yeah, but think the other direction. Submarine launched ballistic missiles. And submarines are basically vulnerable. You know, they're very difficult to find. So these are a deterrent that you can't really knock out. And soon they would have thousands of these weapons. Never again. Now, this is going to have two things will come out of this. Number one, with this, you remember the space race? Soviets pretty much put all their eggs into one basket of missiles, so they're never going to make it to the moon. They would try to get one rocket, but that failed. It literally blew up on the launching pad, and that was it. The Soviets put all their money into missiles, so they weren't going to get to the space race. They kept carrying on. They tried on the shoestring, but now the U.S. has the advantage in that. But number two is more important. Number two is going to have dramatic consequences to this day. Soon, almost 50% of their economy, their GDP, will go towards defense. And this will destroy the Soviet economy. Has everyone got that? That is the most important thing that comes out of this. Khrushchev tried to limit the arms race to save the Soviet economy. This destroyed the Soviet economy. By the 70s, there'd be shortages in everything. The Soviet Union, within the Soviet Union's Ukraine, that was the breadbasket of Europe, the best wheat-growing region in the entire world. And by the 1970s, they had to import grain to keep their people from starving. That's how bad the system got in the Soviet Union. Just literally fell apart. Folded in on itself because everything was for defense. Where did they import the wheat from? Irony of ironies, the United States. And the 80s, pretty much everything was in short supply. The symbol of the 80s for the Soviet Union were long lines for scarce goods. Everything from food to clothing, you name it. Long lines to wait to get the few things on the shelf. And everyone got that? The Soviet Union would be crushed with this. The economy was in free fall by the early 1980s. Everything, defense spending had to drop because we were out of money. In the late 70s, they started cutting back on defense spending. And when they tried to reform the system in the last gasp to save it, the House of Cards collapsed. 89, they had to give up the Iron Curtain. I mean, look, it happened so fast. That's when the wall came down. And in 91, the Soviet Union ended. The end of the Soviet Union was this. Look how many weapons and how destabilized they made the world. I'm not even talking the smaller tactical weapons. That's an ICBM. Those are actually surface-to-air missiles, but I just put missiles. Yeah.
What do they do with the missiles after it collapses?
Well, the missiles they destroyed, but the bombs are more difficult.
Stuff all over the place.
Look how many strategic nuclear bombs. Add another about 20 to 25,000 each for tactical, smaller nuclear weapons. They had enough to destroy the world, both sides, thousands of times over. Thousands of times. And that's just amazing. Basically, it takes about 400 well-placed bombs of about 500 megatons to destroy the world. And what they did with them, they disassembled the bomb and they took the plutonium and stored it. But in the Soviet Union, when it collapsed so fast, there's a lot of the plutonium, basically balls of plutonium. Not sure what's that. The United States stores them, Utah, Nevada, but they can be reassembled immediately. All the components are there.
I had a nightmare about.
Huh?
I had a nightmare about World War II last night. It was really scary.
You know, but the thing about it is that since we're closer than we have been since the Cold War now, it's something that people should be having nightmares about. Oh, by the way, I had that nightmare almost every night. So I know exactly what it's like. It's awful. I grew up in that. It was so much fun. I missed the day when second grade when we had a nuclear test and they didn't tell us it was a drill. I miss that. Okay, so, wow, yeah. It was the scariest thing I've ever been in my life. I saw that. We had a teacher just left. No, she said, I'm getting my kids. She just left. I don't blame her. Seriously. It was scary. And you think Miles City, who would bomb Miles City? They hit the missiles in Montana, or in central Montana, and the fallout was just drenched eastern Montana and North Dakota. So.
So is all they would bomb us?
They hit the weapons, yeah. Oh, yeah. Drive to Great Falls, there's an ICBM right up the road. Oh, yeah, everyone knows. Oh, yeah, we all know. Hey! We have a reality. So, while this is going on, here's the amazing thing. I'm looking for volunteers to go up to that weapon rack here and go shake them.
You know they keep some of those warheads ready to launch.
Or 200 kilos of nuclear weapon. Okay, the Southern Christian Leadership Council kept pushing the civil rights movement. They kept pushing and pushing and pushing. Remember the thing about this. How you're going to get change is force politicians to act. Make them get off their butts and act and not leave their cushy jobs. They just simply get money and go to receptions. No, make them work. And so, The SLC did one of the best examples of civil disobedience was the sit-ins. Were the sit-ins, I'm sorry. It was the sit-ins as a strategy, were the sit-ins. I even want to say citizens. I'm just going to shut up and say, read it. This is one of the most famous in Greensboro, North Carolina, but they did it all over the South. This lunch counter is now in the Smithsonian Museum of American History. They went into segregated restaurants and diners, etc. They did it with counters, so it's very open. They wanted to make sure they went to places that were not like 4-star restaurants or upper class. Go to places where average people go. And they were going to make sure people understood what was the reality of there. Young, very brave men and women want a very clean cut. Remember, you want to have an image when you go in there. They would go and sit and demand to be served. Of course, they wouldn't be served and facing intimidation, harassment, or outright that guy's being dragged off. His stool right there. And the whole idea was to make people see what was going on. They knew they weren't going to change the law in North Carolina, but they knew because of the 14th Amendment, because of the Constitution, the federal government can't change this. So this is what they were trying to do. That's how action happens. Now, some of you might be thinking, no, wait a second. These are privately owned businesses. A privately owned business, they can decide who eats there and who doesn't eat there. And if you think we all live in a vacuum, sure, but we don't live in a vacuum. We live in a market economy where commerce is necessary. And if you have a society where you're saying a significant number of people are not allowed to participate in the daily commercial activities in a market economy, then what you're saying is that you're going to basically put 25% of the population in places like North Carolina in second-class status. They will never be able to have the commercial advantages of anybody else. So this is a commercial endeavor. Yes, it's a restaurant, but what the Jim Crow laws did is say that a huge percent of the population cannot participate in commerce. So, wow, what a huge advantage for those who can. Yes?
So was there a court case on this to make
Oh, yeah, there'll be many court cases to this day. Because states always bring up when they try to stop this, especially southern states, but it happens all. And the other thing is this. This is commerce. What do you use for commerce? What were they going to use to buy the stuff in there? Currency issued by the United States government under the Constitution. And so if the Constitution issued the currency, then the Constitution also has the authority to dictate how the currency will be used. And so that gives the federal government the authority. But yes, court cases come up all the time. It came up immediately on this. But at this time, there was a very liberal court, so they approved it. But years on, they would chip away at some elements of this. And part B, two other groups, CORE and SNCC. I know, I'm sorry, the abbreviations come at you in waves. But the big thing you need to know is the Freedom Riders. They would go through the South and protest against, well, not only segregation and Jim Crow laws, but remember the grandfather's clause? You remember the literacy test for voting? They're going to try to go into towns on integrated buses and try to register African Americans who were denied the right to vote in the South. And so here's some of the past of the Freedom Riders in '61. And all along, they know they're going to get beaten, attacked, arrested, just harassed generally. Most famously outside of Birmingham, Alabama, the state police would stop them right outside of Birmingham and then turn their backs. So their buses, and here are the buses. That's the bus. Here's the bus after it was stopped. To basically turn their back, and so thugs, Klansmen, actually local police came with Molotov cocktails and firebombed the bus. You know what a Molotov cocktail is? The most basic element, gasoline in a jar, a few other ingredients. For a rag. You'll never find out. And a rag, you light it. Yeah. They're called Molotov because the Russians encouraged the Spanish Civil War to use it. Molotov was their foreign minister. He didn't invent it, they just named it after the Soviet foreign minister. What else would you name a firebomb? They bombed it, a number of people were severely injured, and then as soon as they got out, many of them are sitting right there outside the burnt bus, then the state police turned around and arrested them for inciting violence. and in the process beat the hell out of a lot of them. Here, they can tooth out. That's John Lewis, one of the leaders of SNCC, and he was one of the organizers of the Freedom Riders, and he'd be beaten and arrested a number of times there. His jaw has just been shattered. You notice how his jaw sunk in? He today is a congressman from Georgia. And I admire John Lewis a lot, so I had a chance to see him talk. It's really interesting. But to this day, when he talks, he has trouble speaking because it's still kind of sunk in, it's just shattered, and wouldn't allow to see a doctor for 2 days, killed in jail, which is torture. But and here's the point: remember what they're doing, forcing Congress to act. And who is on the side of justice here? Who's on the side of justice? Clean-cut, brave, intelligent people, or those firebombing and beating them? Forcing them to act. But here's the thing. We're going to jump right to this. By the summer of '63, because of civil rights and other issues, it looked like the New Frontier was a failure. And Kennedy's program might be a failure. In fact, Kennedy, with his popularity was he was personally popular. His approval rating was going down, and there's a couple of scenes from this. It seemed like his presidency was out of control. By the summer of '63, Kennedy was begging civil rights leaders to quit protesting. You're putting too much pressure on me. You're making me look bad, and begged him to stop. But that's what they're trying to do, is force him to act. And that is why, over the begging and threatening of the Kennedy administration, was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom for the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. It was basically done by the NAACP and the SCLC, but also labor unions, especially the United Auto Workers. They put up the money for it, the UAW. Labor unions were the first to desegregate. Labor unions were a major fighter for civil rights. Not all the members, but the leadership. King was a major union man. Completely believed in union. He died when he was assassinated in Memphis. He was there to support the garbage workers union. That's why he was in Memphis. And 16 speakers, 100,000 people came. And you think about before like social media and the internet and that kind of thing, how difficult it would be to get people to go, and how difficult it would be for people, especially so many impoverished, to make it there. Over 100,000 came, and 16 speakers. King agreed rather reluctantly to be the last speaker. Yes?
Did you say it was the 100th anniversary?
Yeah. His Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863. So even though it wasn't the exact 100th, year-wise it was. And we're going to listen to just a little bit of King's speech, because when King spoke, he gave a prepared speech. And King, like everybody else there, emphasized two things. Yes, they wanted to get rid of the laws that segregated them. They desperately wanted the right to vote, which was seen as the most important thing. Remember Seneca Falls back in 1848? Women understood that too back in 1848. You're never going to have equal rights if you don't have suffrage. But also, the big thing they emphasized here was economic justice. And economic justice is messy. There's significantly higher unemployment and poverty rate amongst African Americans at this time, but also Hispanic immigrants. And back then they would say this generic term minorities, which is going away. No longer is it a minority. But economically, without near as many opportunities, partially by the law, partially by the customs and practices of racism. And so, that's what he emphasized. As he's giving the speech, and the crowd is okay, but what was happening is what he feared. It's hot. Washington, D.C. in August, the temperature, 1,000,000 degrees. And that's including what? The wind chill. And so, he then gave up his speech, and he had this brilliant ability to speak off the cuff, and went into what he called a shtick. What he gave at every speech where he talked about what his vision was for the future. I'll play a little bit of that because it leads me into say one other thing about this. So I'm just going to fast forward this. We have the dramatic music
and shared with the protesters his dream of equal rights for all.
Let freedom ring, and when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Stirring words, that's what everybody remembers. And it's also very comforting because the idea was, yeah, that does sound good. And that is something, especially looking back at it, people can say, wow, he just wanted everyone to be equal, and that's a great world. Wonder what's on TV. Because that's a fight. And that's not easy. And he knew it. People remembered the shtick that he used to grab people at the end. And yeah, he was brilliant. By the way, saying the shtick means somebody's dead, you're going to catch the crowd. It doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean it's wrong. But that was after a long fight. Sure, you can get rid of Jim Crow laws. In fact, it's relatively easy to do that, especially for people in the North to say, look how evil those Southerners are. Let's get rid of those laws. But what if the fight for economic justice and equal rights starts to affect you? What if it affects your job? What if it affects your voting? What if they can no longer keep black people out of neighborhoods? And the belief was if a black person moved into a neighborhood, property values would go down. Would you allow your property values to go down and therefore lose a lot of the wealth you finally accumulate in your house and then to go down? What if they want to desegregate schools by busing your kids across town for an hour to a school so we can integrate? Are you willing to do that? Do you want to do that? Now, you can make your own value judgment whether that's good policy or not, but that's a fight, and that's change, and that's a different reality. Oh, sure. That sounds good. So we could all say, yeah, isn't that great? We're all going to be living together in peace and harmony. Boom. My job is done. I think we should live in peace and harmony. And I move on. No, it's a fight. He knew it. And he knew it would be a battle. And he knew it would be divisive. The vast majority of whites in the United States looked at that speech and said he was confrontational and inciting people. Yeah. And it's fascinating now that so many people said, oh, it's a brilliant speech, but not realizing that what he wanted was real change. And he was a socialist. And so he was for radical change. Doesn't mean you can agree or disagree with everything he believed in, but it's a fight, is my point. And so, with that, Kennedy has to act. Gosh, I hope there's nothing else big going on. This could be kind of problematic. What a time! So, with Berlin and Cuba and civil rights, the Civil War in South Vietnam was falling apart. Kennedy had increased the number of advisors. Like here's a Green Beret, and it's funny he's not wearing a beret. He's a special forces. Training soldiers, but even helicopter pilots who were ferrying South Vietnamese troops to fight the Viet Cong. National Liberation Front, everybody called them the Viet Cong. There were a little bit over, under 1,000 advisors when Kennedy took office. When he was assassinated, there were over 18,000. We've given them hundreds of millions of dollars in aid. And the Viet Cong looked like they were winning. They controlled the countryside. The South Vietnamese army was poorly led, low morale. The government was corrupt beyond belief. It looked horrible. Yet Kennedy, think about it. Bay of Pigs, Berlin Wall, Vienna Conference going on. I forgot that one there too. But then the Cuban Missile Crisis. You have all these events that have the appearance of the Cold War. Things aren't as safe. Maybe Kennedy's not doing good after promising after the Cuban Missile Crisis. The New Frontier failing. Civil rights, he failed on that, and now they're pushing it. He needs success. And Kennedy is going to make South Vietnam a goal. We must save South Vietnam. He made it incredibly important. And the thing is, some people said, well, Kennedy knew we couldn't, this would be a bad thing to get in full. So did LBJ. They knew it was bad, but they felt they had no choice. And we'll jump right to here. Here's the reason why. All these we've talked about before. The reason why. You notice I put it in front of an election thing. Denominal theory from the Truman Doctrine. And by the way, never forget the Truman Doctrine. At least until you take the test, and I can't force you. I'm not going to follow you around. But don't forget Berlin. We must defend Berlin. We pledged to it. We pledged in Berlin. If I'm a jelly donut, then I'm going to defend South Vietnam too. No, we never. Civil rights, but then re-election. How could he get passage of civil rights bill that he promised that stalled, or re-elected if he soft on communism? So these are the reasons that Kennedy is going to make Vietnam important. South Vietnam. We always say the Vietnam War, but it's South Vietnam. Here's the thing. What's not on there? Say it again. There's nothing about South Vietnam. We're not committing the lives of young men and women and millions of dollars of our treasure for the people themselves. It's political or this kind of global foreign policy. It's not even for the people of South Vietnam. How can we win a war if we really don't even care about the people we're defending? How do we convince people we care for them if we don't care for them? And there's something else. If we don't even care about South Vietnam, what are we going to do someday? Because it's not that important. Oh yeah, it's really important to the South Vietnamese, but it's not necessarily that important to South Vietnam. It just happened to be the place they picked for this stand. Wow. This would never happen again. Don't worry. But, jumping the gun. And the problem is, Diem, the dictator, corrupt, awful dictator. A nightmare. Diem is a nightmare. He's Catholic in a Buddhist majority country, and normally that wouldn't be that big a deal except for the French were Catholic. So he looks like they called it a Mandarin, but collaborating with the French. And corrupt, put his family members in high public places. They're stealing money from the Treasury, or the U.S. was giving them millions of dollars, and they're just pocketing so much of that. And beginning in 62 and 63, in southern towns, people who had normally been opposed to the Viet Cong began to protest. And the protest turned, okay, I'm going to use the word, I'm about to say spectacular, but it sounds like I mean spectacular as in good. I mean just as memorable, become one of the symbols of the Vietnam War. Buddhist monks began to cover themselves with gasoline and then light themselves on fire in protest of the Diem administration. Some of you probably seen pictures like this before.
How was that a protest?
They're just desperately trying to get people to pay attention. I know we can find logical errors to it, but that is, you wouldn't have, if they just talked, you wouldn't have noticed it, we wouldn't have mentioned it, right? We're looking at the picture now, aren't we? I'm not saying it's the best protest, but it's memorable. And this one always gets me. This is just sitting there. I don't know how, I can't even, yeah. The Diem government, yeah. The guy the Americans were supporting. I know it's Diem, but it's pronounced Sem. Or Vietnamese. That's the most famous one. It's just, his legs are just kind of coming up, supposedly just before he is dying right there. That doesn't look like we're winning in South Vietnam, does it? And so when South Vietnamese generals approached the United States that summer of '63, all this is happening at once, isn't it? And said, we'd like to get rid of them in a coup. We agreed. We didn't participate. We didn't organize this. The CIA didn't organize this. It went all the way to Kennedy, and Kennedy said, reluctantly, yes. Because he thought, this goes bad, we'll look bad. And it went bad. In the process of overthrowing Diem, he was captured, and then tortured to death. There is his body after being tied up, beaten, and shot to death. And as I understand, then he shoot him like this in one shot and he's dead. No, they got shot like his feet and that. I mean, they're lynching. It's a lynching. So it's chaos. And the thing is, even though the United States did not come up with this idea, even though the United States did not carry it out, everybody blamed the U.S. In fact, the term was the U.S. is responsible. And in a way, we are. Because the generals had to come to the United States for approval because they're getting their money from the U.S. And we said yes. But once that happened, now we're stuck. And now there's going to be a series of military dictatorships. That's General Big Dim. And he was one of them, and we're stuck with him. There'll be a dictatorship, and this is going to happen almost every 6 months for the next 4 years. There'll be a coup, a military dictator. The dictator will announce, democracy on the march. They'll talk about writing a new constitution. We'll say, freedom is here. We finally got rid of the corrupt government. Everything's fine. 6 months later, a new dictatorship. Then new constitution, freedom on the march, boom, new dictator. And this happens for 4 years every 6 months. And that's the problem. Now we're stuck with them. We're stuck with these guys. We can't say they're bad, or they'll give us even more responsibility, and they'll say our entire policy was wrong. So we must just continue to go along with them, as they just stole like mad. Virtually all of these dictators, including the last one, who will be in power for nearly 8 years, a general by the name of Tu, when they would leave after the Vietnam War ended and South Vietnam was absorbed into one Vietnam, they came to the United States with millions of dollars that they stole almost exclusively from U.S. aid to them. They lived quite nice. Tu had a big mansion in Oregon. A couple of them lived near Kalispell. A couple of the generals. And you think, okay, we would never do that again. This is Afghanistan now. We're stuck with a government by definition as a kleptocracy. They steal like mad, but we can't go against them. Does that make sense? If we go against them, that gives us even, like, we'll never get out, and we'll be saying our entire policy was wrong. And everybody knows they're a kleptocracy. Everybody knows it. It's kind of a running joke. And who do they blame there? Us. It's a problem that just keeps spiraling on top of each other. And yes, it happened in Iraq. And if we try to do it someplace else, it will happen there. And so, it's kind of weird to think about it, because it happened so close. Just a month and a half after Zim was assassinated, Kennedy was assassinated. On November 22nd, 1963, on a campaign swing in Texas, Lee Harvey Oswald would assassinate John Kennedy in his motorcade as he passed the Texas School Book Depository, Dealey Plaza. Right there. Dealey Plaza. Pretty cool, huh? The buildings collapsed. And he actually, in the speech he was going to give before he was assassinated, or I'm sorry, right after he would have been assassinated, was going to brag about the success in South Vietnam, now with a new government. This ironic twist. You know, maybe Kennedy might have not avoided some of the pitfalls of Vietnam that's going to come after his death, maybe not. But there's no indication at all that he was somehow going to like pull out and would have these problems. That's kind of unimaginable, just seeing how the Cold War was. Oswald was arrested an hour and a half after the assassination for killing a police officer. And then they tied him to the assassination of the president. And there he is in his mugshot. He pulled the gun on the police officer, so they kind of roughed him up to get the gun out of his hands. And by that evening, the Dallas police force had so much evidence against him that it was overwhelming. In any other murder case, it would have been cut dry, guilty. And who knows what would have happened, because 2 days after the assassination, what happened to Oswald? The assassin was killed by another assassin. Of course, Jack Ruby, a strip club owner, I mean, of course, he's a strip club owner. All assassins are strip club owners at some time in their lives. Who will become the next president? And Lyndon Johnson would sweep into power unlike anything we have ever seen.
So if a situation like this happens and I'll be here before the president for like a year or whatever, would he be able to do 2 more terms? Or
Yeah.
is that a year?
Because what happens is, if the way the amendment read, that in this situation like this, if the president served less than 3 years after he became the president, they run for 2 more years.
Okay. So somebody could be president for like 11 years.
Yeah, just like a day under 11 years. And yeah, so that would have, you know, and even the biggest landslide in history is 64. So the assumption was he probably would have been.
I don't know. Yeah.
Then, yeah.
Oh, we're not on here. Oh, yeah, we're tracking. I kind of want to come here. Yeah, we never come. Who needs to warm up before racing? It's time. We might be. I might be.
If you had a track, no, I'm serious. Well, if you want to cover half through,
I think
I have no problem with that. No problem.
I need to get my notes.
I'm gonna go tomorrow.
Why?
Because it's bring your trip on Wednesday. Yeah, actually, that's what I was like.
I'm not going to give you any more homework. 'Cause I pretty much, you know, I gave the review, so you're going to miss a ton of, you know.
Yeah.
I understand. What's your dad do?
My dad is a lead